I want to welcome you to Open Table United Church of Christ, to our Social Justice Speaker Series. It is good to have you here on this glorious day with the sun shining and some breeze blowing. It's good to be in this place. I'm going to do very little talking tonight and invite Heather to come and share a little bit more about why you're here this evening. So, Heather, would you come on up?
I'm going to whip out my teacher voice here. Nancy opted to not use the mic, so I'll just go to my classroom voice. My name is Heather Francis, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. In this building, I wear several hats. Tonight, two come to mind. Member of the Peace and Justice team here at church, at Open Table, and we're the sponsors of the speaker series. Nancy is our 6th speaker. And a side note, we're going to take the summer off a little bit and we'll kick back up again in the fall. The other hat is as the program assistant, of the Ottawa site for Youth Outlook's drop-in centers, which means I lead the programming here for our youth that attend. It's in this second role that I was introduced to Nancy Mullen. The Peace and Justice team here at Open Table wanted to do something for area LGBTQ plus youth and their allies. We wanted to make a safe space, a place they could come and chat, have fun, find allies, find other friends, find support. And that led us to Nancy. We were appointed to Youth Outlook, and I was unable to meet with him the first 2 times our church got together with him. And I was really disappointed because I kept hearing all these great things and people were coming back so excited. And so enthusiastic, I was starting to think that Nancy really didn't exist and was this fanciful unicorn out there somewhere. Instead, and indeed, Nancy is very real. And a trained pastry chef. And, an author, looking for her first book to be published. So if you've got any connections, let us know. A dog owner 3 times over. And one who wants a pot-bellied pig. Yes. More pertinent to tonight, Nancy holds a master's in social work from Syracuse University, is the first and only executive director of Youth Outlook, and it is an honor and a pleasure to have you with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Good evening. How's everybody? Good evening. Good. No cats. No, not this time around. Maybe another lifetime. I want to share with you that I am just so happy to be here for 2 reasons. One, it's always fun to open up the new drop-in centers. 2, putting this presentation together that I'm about to share with you. This has been one of the most fun things I have done, and I can't tell you, this is probably the most fun presentation I have ever done in the history of my job with Youth Outlook, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years. So I am really thrilled to be able to kind of walk you through a little bit of our history and tell you about some kids I'm very proud of, since it is Pride Month, right? And to tell you a little bit about what's going on with kids locally and nationally. Little statistics, very little statistics. I really don't have a fondness for statistics, so I'll just kind of share more anecdotal kind of stuff, but I can quote you some statistics if you're really dying to hear them tonight. So, shall we? Okay, okay. So, this alleged Youth Outlook. I would love to be able to tell you that we have found the fountain of youth. You know, and that's what we're doing. We're out there making more young people. We're not really finding the fountain of youth. We're not making more young people. The young people are finding us. So, no, not really fountain of youth kind of thing. Not our style. There is some stuff that we do that you could kind of pull out your sleeve if you ever wanted to describe us to somebody. So we're the only organization around the area of the state that does what we do. We're actually the first organization in Illinois to do what we do. We're the only standalone not-for-profit that works with LGBTQ, only with LGBTQ. There are lots of other organizations that have LGBTQ groups. They're housed in larger hospitals or larger HIV organizations. They're not their own standalone not-for-profit. As I've looked across the country, there are actually very few of us. We're kind of a unique animal in the United States. So it's kind of fun to be able to go out and explain that to folks. We don't look like most other not-for-profits. We're a little bit on the unusual side. So what we do, now that we have defined what it is that Youth Outlook can do, let me tell you exactly what we do. We run drop-in centers. You have one right here in this building. The Rainbow Room, just the other side of the doorway. We have drop-in centers in 6 counties right now. And we have had requests from 6 other locations just since the beginning of this year, as more and more schools are trying to get in front of this topic, as more and more mental health providers are trying to get in front of this topic. People want to, as Heather mentioned, want to get out and make services available to LGBT kids. So that's happening, and that's really kind of a booming part of our work right now. We also have a youth leadership project that happens out of all of our drop-in centers, where we're working with the kids to do public speaking. Be part of our community education team. Let's go back into your school and talk about what went well and what didn't go well and what they can do different for kids who are coming up behind you. We have kids who take advantage of opportunities to work with our board of directors. Also practicing peer negotiation, conflict resolution, you name it, and we will get coaching for our kids to develop those skills. Looks good on college resumes. Kids have fun with it. So we're all about why not? If it looks good on your resume and it helps develop you into a healthy person, we're going to do that. The indirect thing that we're doing is this. This part of what we're doing right now, this going out and talking to people, is booming. We have a whole group of people organized out of the board of directors just to deal with the requests that we're getting right now for community education to the schools, community education to mental health providers and healthcare providers. Tell us about what's happening with LGBT kids, because I'll tell you what's happening with LGBT kids right now is very different from what was happening with LGBT kids when I started in 1998. The world has changed so quickly. So I will lead you through what that is and why that is, so that we all have a sense of where the agency could go in this community and as a larger agency. All right, so let's start with my first point. Everybody's got one of each. You know what I mean by that? Everybody's got a sexual orientation. Everybody's got a gender identity. They're not the same. They're 2 very different things in our brain. And I love it when I go out and I talk to college classes and I ask who's got a sexual orientation, and only the gay kids raise their hand. Wrong. Everybody's got one. If you're straight, if you're asexual, if you're gay, if you're lesbian, those are all sexual orientations. So if you're straight, please own that. You have a sexual orientation. You're heterosexual. You have a gender identity. Not just trans people, not just gender neutral people, not just gender fluid people have a gender identity. All people have a gender identity. If your gender identity matches what's going on in your head, the term for that is cisgender. Whatever is he talking about? Shall we pick that apart just a little bit? All right, with this Youth Outlook puzzle. So we know this. These are 2 things that are not the same. We conflate these things all the time. They're not interchangeable. And our kids are doing this in a very expressive way that over the years of Youth Outlook, we've not seen what's going on right now before. What's happening right now with gender identity expression and tinkering with gender identities is really different than what has happened, say, 10 or 15 years back. Okay? We're going to hang on to that. I'm going to introduce you to the alphabet soup. Are folks familiar with the alphabet soup? The LGBTQIAA2S? All right, so now you know why we say LGBT. Right? Because there's a whole string of letters that go with that, and we've condensed it to LGBT. Shall we pick them apart a little bit more? You ready to keep digging with me? All right, so in my world, I have to write grants for my agency. Right? That's how some of our funding comes in. I don't always assume that I'm writing grants to people who understand gender identity and sexual orientation. Sometimes they have nothing to do with gender identity and sexual orientation, and I end up having to explain to them what I mean by these terms. So I've gotten in the habit when I go out and do public speaking, I want everybody on the same page, so I want you all to be using this word the same way I'm using this word, and the same way I would write it into my hypothetical grant. Everybody good with that? All right. Let's put a working definition to the word lesbian just for the purposes of our conversation this evening. Did you tell them this was interactive? Did you tell them they have to talk to me? You guys have to talk to me. Okay. Just throw some ideas out to me. What's it mean to you? Lesbian.
A girl that likes other girls, but not all girls because we're not all insane.
A girl that likes other girls, but not all other girls because we're not all what?
Insane.
We're not all insane. You are so right. Does anybody want to add to that? Does anybody want to argue it?
No.
Did you want to add?
Yes, I wanted to elaborate on it.
Go ahead.
A female who likes basically other females.
Anybody want to argue with that?
Somewhat. Sexual attraction.
Has something to do with sexual attraction? Are there any
Well,
other
it can also
components
be
of this we're missing?
It can also be romantic attraction
Rather than sexual? Yeah, absolutely.
Good point.
And it's not towards guys.
Well, I mean, because like, you can be attracted to girls. I mean, no one.
That's
That's a problem.
a different slide.
Good job, though.
We're going to get there in just a minute. But you are absolutely right. Okay. Shall I give you the definition that I use when I'm writing?
Yes.
Okay. So you are all right on target with this. This is how I word it in my hypothetical grants. A female identified person, because why?
Could be male.
Right.
Exactly.
This is fun. Okay, we'll come back to that idea. Yes, I heard rumblings of the right answer. A female identified person who is attracted to some, thank you, other female identified people. Why is it important that we bring out the word some? You want to keep going with this?
Sure. Because sometimes when I tell people that I am bisexual, they think that I am attracted to everybody on the planet, and that is not the case.
No.
Thank you.
I don't like wake up in the morning and see some girl walking down the street and say like, oh, she's cute, or vice versa with the guy. And it's some people, like their like personality traits, different features,
Sure.
like, and it'll.
And that works for you?
Play.
Sure.
And,
Should I get really blunt?
yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I don't need show of hands for who is straight in our studio audience. But if you're straight, let's think about this. You're not attracted to everybody of the opposite sex, are you?
No.
No.
It works the same way in our world. But this is sometimes a new concept for people. And this is part of why we're sometimes still arguing that gay folks are not predatory. Because it's not like you're going to attack someone or be even attracted to somebody who is the opposite, who is the same sex immediately. Doesn't work that way for us, doesn't work that way for you. That's easy information to pass along. Was that blunt enough? All right, good. All right, let's take this same concept then and apply it to those wild and rascally gay men. How are we defining these folks?
Somebody that identifies as a male is attracted to some others that identify as male.
I like that. Would anyone like to argue with it?
I never argue with Meredith.
I think. Because we got it directly from Meredith. We're just going to move right on. Male identified person attracted to some other male identified people. All right, let's mix it up a little bit. Give me a working definition for bisexuals.
Someone who is attracted to both female and male identities.
All of them?
No,
Some of them?
some of them.
Okay, so some of both. That's a very good way to shorthand this slide. Some of both. Okay. All right. Or, okay, we could put the word or in there. Any other thoughts on this? When I shorthand this for my hypothetical grant, I usually say it's a person for whom gender is not the primary thing that determines attraction. So it might be a lot of different things that you see or are in tune with that are what draws you to somebody. All right, they're just going to get a little harder as we move forward. Wait a minute, because bisexual, if you act now. I should have brought some ginsu knives. We can slice a tomato. But wait, there's more. Right? We don't use this term very often anymore. There's another term that a lot of kids have started using, moving away from this idea that people can identify as only male and only female, which is how most of us were brought up to believe, right? Kids are taking that whole idea and shaking it up and saying, it's not so much about being only male or only female. What about the people who are kind of androgynous? What if I'm attracted to somebody who lives somewhere in the middle of those two bookends? What does that make me? So the term that we're hearing a lot more than we're hearing anything else is pansexual. And for me, coming out of culinary school, I am drawn to shiny inanimate objects in my kitchen, but this is not what that means. Here we're talking about the full range of gender expression, whether you express yourself as masculine in the world or whether you express yourself as more feminine in the world, or somewhere in between, gender neutral, gender fluid. Gender fluid can change from hour to hour. Gender neutral kind of hovers in that androgynous zone. Maybe agender, you don't identify with gender at all. Ready to keep digging? We've got to go a little further. Okay. Okay. Let's put a working definition to transgender.
A male who identifies as a female, or a female who identifies as a male.
I like your foundation. Let's add to it. Anybody want to add to that?
Someone who identifies as something different than what they were assigned at birth.
Oh,
That's way better.
word for word. Your assigned gender at birth does not match the identity in your head. What we're hearing now from some of the youth is that they know very early on that their gender doesn't match what people are referring to them as. So what they're experiencing in their head is not how the rest of the world sees them. And our kids have started to use the term in the last couple of years. AMAB and AFAB. Assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth. Doesn't mean that that's what they identify as in their head. That's just what the doctor signed off of on their little certificate. Okay? The Q word. Does anyone cringe when they hear the Q word? It's kind of ugly. It was kind of ugly until about 15 years ago, but it's been reclaimed. The kids use it regularly. I use it all the time. We, in fact, get grant applications now that tell us about your services for queer youth. If I don't give them back the language that they're using in the grant, we're considered not progressive enough. We're the only organization around the area that's doing this, but we're not progressive enough, so we get screened out of funding. So take the sting out of this. The kids own it, the kids use it, it's okay, it's a political term. It's okay with a caveat. If you don't live within the LGBT community, it's probably best you don't use it, unless you have someone's express permission. All good with that? Yes. All right. Disorders of sex development. We keep moving through our alphabet soup. Has anyone heard the term intersex before? Okay. For folks who have not heard the term intersex, I'm going to go into the Wayback Machine and say that probably 20, 30 years ago we used the word hermaphrodite. No longer a word that is used commonly, it's fallen out of favor. Intersex is actually on its way out the door as well. We are now using disorders or differences of sexual development. Folks recognize the runner there at the bottom of the screen? If you haven't gone through youth outlook training, I don't know if you'll know this one. This is a gold medalist from South Africa, Caster Semenya. Caster was a runner in the 2009 Summer Olympics. And when Caster competed, Caster just blew through gold medal after gold medal. And Caster's body was able to do these really amazing things that people weren't sure why Caster was able to do these things. So they looked at Caster and they went, you're doing all of these things that the typical woman can't do. You must be on steroids. So the Olympic judges carted Caster off and said, test her. The tests came back for Caster clean because Caster wasn't on steroids. And the Olympic judges looked at the results and looked at Caster and said, well, you're still doing something that isn't typical of females, so what's going on with your body? And then they put Caster through some extra testing, and they came back that Caster's body was producing about 3 times the level of testosterone that the average female produces, which allowed Caster to develop musculature that the average woman cannot produce, which allowed her to compete in the Olympics in the way that an average woman would not be able to compete. And at that point, they realized that Caster was intersex, not on steroids. Caster's body probably had an undescended testicle somewhere, and he was producing and pumping testosterone into Caster's system. And at that point, this poor kid's medical information went global headlines, and she didn't know. She had no idea. She'd been born female, she was raised female, she believed herself to be female, and then here's this information about her right in the headlines. And they immediately stopped talking about it. When they, hello HIPAA, they stopped talking about her medical information. It kind of disappeared from the public eye for a while, and Caster was banned from competing in the Olympics as a female for at least a couple of years, until the Olympic judges kind of figured out what they could do with her. She has since been able to compete again, but we just went through this again the last Summer Olympics round. There was a runner from India who went through the same thing. So we need to figure out what to do for folks who live with this medical condition. And we need to stop blasting their information across headline news. So intersex or DSD, folks who are born with the characteristics of both within their body. Who are the allies?
Friends.
There are friends. Who else are the allies?
Supporters.
All the supporters. Who else are the allies?
Family.
Us.
Thank you. That's why we're here, right? You guys are the allies? Yes. Yes, you're here. Okay. Asexual. We are hearing lots and lots of kids these days describe themselves as asexual. It concerns me just a little. When we started running Youth Outlook in the late 90s, we were dealing with kids who were 17, 18, 19 years old. Being in a room of 30 17-year-olds, it was like hormones with feet. Like, the energy was incredible. Now we have a fair share of kids. I can't give you the actual statistics because I have to go review our intakes for this one, and I didn't get a chance to do that. But we have a fair share of kids who are telling us, I don't have a sex drive, or I'm not sexually attracted to anyone. So that concerns me just a little bit. What about bodies has shifted in the last decade or so that is driving the sex drive down so low in people who are supposed to be experiencing hormonally a surge in their sex drive? Questions for us to ponder when we leave here tonight. 2S, Two-Spirit. Have folks heard this term before? Yes. This is a native term, and if you do not live within the native community, we are asked to keep our paws off of it. We do not have access, we do not have a right to kind of assume what is a sacred role for them and refer to ourselves that way. So grant applications are very specific. Unless you're writing from a territory, you do not get to use this term. You do not get to identify that way. So we do not use this term. We do not encourage our kids to use the term to describe themselves either, unless of course they are native. All right, so back to my slide from a minute ago. Everybody's got them, right? So they're not the same things. You've got biology, you've got identity. What's the difference? Where is that difference between what's going on in your head and what's going on with your plumbing? No thoughts on that? Okay.
I actually wouldn't call it plumbing, I would call it wiring.
Wiring? Okay, we'll go with that word. So where's the difference in our hypothetical grant? How am I explaining that?
Thank you.
What do you mean by where? Where's the difference? You mean where is it located in the body?
Oh, no, not physiologically. What would be the difference for folks who are experiencing themselves differently in their heads than what has happened with their wiring, how they've come into the world? Or
You mean their physical wiring?
their physical wiring? Mhm. And in some sense, I do mean plumbing. I'm talking about the physical body. Okay.
I'm sorry,
All right,
I don't
well-
understand the question.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. All right. Let's play a game. You ready to play a game?
Ooh, I'm ready.
All right, okay.
I'm
I
ready.
think we can do the binary game. Okay, so we have taken this idea that you can be either male in the world or you can be female in the world, and those are your only two options, right? Right? There's nothing in the middle. And our kids have taken that same set of bookends and said, it doesn't work for me, we're not doing it that way. We'll tell you how we feel. We'll tell you what our experience is. We'll tell you how we identify. Your terms that we've lived with for decades and decades and decades are not as relevant to us as they are to you. Okay, cool. So, most of us who are over probably the age of 35, have grown up in a world where this male-female thing is very much a binary system. So, let's play a game around that. I'm going to give you a couple of sets of characteristics. If the first set of characteristics applies to you, just stand up at your chair if you're able to. If you're not able to, raise your hand if you're going to stand up. If the second characteristic applies to you, I want you to just stay in your chair, okay? First characteristic up, second characteristic down. All good? Those are the ground rules. Next ground rules, there's no talking. I'm looking at you, Meredith. There's no talking.
I mean what?
And next ground rule, there's no hovering. You are on your feet or you are in that chair. No hovering. Everybody good?
You're in between now.
No? You can't. You get it? Nope, that's the rule. Up or down? Binaries. Up or down? All right? Okay. Play as you are willing and able. I have black hair, stand up. I have blonde hair. Stay seated. Black hair up, blonde hair down. All right, no talking. I am tall, stand up. I am short, sit down. I am lazy, stand up. I am motivated, sit down. Motivated to sit down. I am artistic, stand up. I am athletic, sit down. There's no talking. There's no talking. I am in a relationship, stand up. I am all alone, sit down. And then an easy one here at the end. I like dogs, stand up. I like cats, sit down.
No.
No talking. Okay, everybody sit down. What was that mess all about? Very black and white, go ahead.
Showing how those who don't conform to either male or female feel when all these stereotypes are thrust at them and they just don't feel like they fit.
feel like you fit in. Did anybody find that both sets of characteristics applied?
Yes.
How'd you make a decision where to go?
The one that I was more to,
More. Were there any that you were equal with?
the cat and the dog one.
Yeah.
How do you pick? How'd you pick?
I have cats at home, so I do that.
Okay. All right. Did anybody find that neither of the characteristics applied in any of those combinations? Sometimes. And then how'd you pick? So it's like, all right. So they're neither one of them is good, but I'll go with this one because that feels a little closer and a little less bad.
Like with the hair one, like the blonde or black, like I end up having either blonde or black hair. So like black is like closer to brown though, I feel like.
There's always a bald guy in the room. It's like, what am I gonna do with this? Okay. All right. So what does that tell us about binaries?
They're limiting.
Binaries are very limiting. And we've taken the most complicated and complex human behavior and human expression and applied this incredibly binary structure to it and said, you've got male, you've got female, those are your only options. Now choose. And what if neither one of them fits? What if they both kind of fit? What do you do then? Do you go with
No,
what,
you do
what's
not.
easiest? Do you go with what just kind of feels like the closest? How do you pick? Go with whatever you feel is comfortable?
You redefine one of them to fit what works for you.
You could redefine.
When you only have two
Absolutely.
choices.
I think we are in the process of a cultural redefinition. It's a very good way to put it. Okay, so back to my original question. Where do things trip up, disconnect from what you're experiencing in your head to what you're able to express, what you're allowed to express, what's an acceptable thing to express about your identity? Does that question make any more sense? Am I still struggling with it?
Well, my answer now would be that everywhere. I mean, the trip up can come in different social situations, educational situations, family situations, you know,
Like,
Society
Filling out
expectations.
forms.
filling out forms.
Going to the
Everywhere.
doctor.
everywhere. Yeah, absolutely, everywhere. Okay.
What about just being a unique individual?
What about it?
That's totally applicable to all aspects. And acceptable. And mostly
what?
not acceptable, but you have to work your way through it.
What's not acceptable? I'm sorry?
I said it's not mostly acceptable to be a unique individual, no matter what. Regardless of
Because
any
when you
of
walk
that.
into something like a doctor's office and you're handed that form, you've got two choices. And neither one of them says I'm a unique individual. It says I'm male or I'm female.
You make yourself a unique individual.
I've started drawing in the box for myself. Yeah, my doctors
That's how
are
you
usually
make
a
your
little
way.
annoyed by it.
It's exactly how you make your way.
But I can do that at 52. We're talking
Indeed.
about 12-year-olds now.
Indeed.
So,
I
There-
have one.
a 12-year-old or a 52-year-old?
Both.
This is a very fun group. Okay, are we ready to move on? Question answered? All right, so we're tripping up pretty much everywhere around this right now because this has come bursting out of the floodgates in the last couple of years. And I will tell you, we are seeing more trans kids, more gender fluid kids, more kids who are describing themselves as non-binary right now in the last 2 years than we have seen in the entire history of the agency. That's 20 years combined. So this is a big thing. Kids have really, as Katie was saying, started to redefine our culture and our understanding, and they are seeing themselves as unique individuals, and they're not willing to just be those little check boxes on that form anymore. But you've got huge systems that are pushing back on that. You've got instructional systems. The school systems are not going down easy. Insurance systems are not going down easy. There are lots and lots of big institutions that are telling us your choice to be a unique individual, we don't want to hear it. So comply with this, check a box, sit down, and stop talking.
Oh, but you've already been assigned.
You were assigned at birth. Right. Right. We were all assigned at birth. About, do I have time to do this? About 1 in 2,000 live births are considered an intersex person. But basically the doctor brings child into the world, right? Here's child rolling off the assembly line, and they give it the peek test. Take a little baby, hang the little baby up by little feet. You peek at what's going on between the legs. Oh, it's male. Oh, it's female. Oh, we don't know. What do we know? We don't know. Things are this big on little tiny baby bodies. Things are ambiguous on little tiny baby bodies. And it's hard to say little tiny baby bodies. I'm not going to risk it one more time. All right, so doctors are taking that and assigning. And sometimes they're wrong. That's one of the problems. Sometimes they're wrong. Okay, so great resource. If you do not have one of these books in the building, highly recommended. Version 3 of this just came out, I think. Edition 3, sorry, I should say. The Genderbread Person by Sam Killerman makes it really conversational. It's very easy to start conversations with folks of all ages about those 4 points that we were just talking about. The gender identity that happens in your head, we all have one. The gender expression, how I express myself to the world, whether I express myself as more masculine or more feminine. Biological sex, what's happening with that plumbing we were talking about. We can say plumbing in here, right? We're all grown people.
Yeah.
Okay, so the plumbing that we were talking about. And then sexual orientation, who you're attracted to. All right. A couple things to know about what's happening with that identity formation for fabulously unique people. We have recently done some research that tells us that the human brain has kind of started to identify, the human brain has started to identify whether or not it identifies as male or female by the time the kid is 3 years old. That's before kids even have a really good grasp on the English language, or any language. So they've got this kind of percolating in their brain, whether or not they're male or female, by how they compare to other people, what they know other people have, what they see other people doing in their roles in the family, whether or not that resonates with them, and the messages that they're getting about what little boys do and what little girls do, or what little male-bodied people do and what little female-bodied people do. Yes?
I will share with this, that a lot of research has actually contributed to the fact gender non-specific, that the human brain, the human body, the brain is developed mostly in the first 3 years, as far as what it is that you can, like, learn, starting to teach, and it's,
No, we're like little sponges in that time frame.
indeed,
It is
that's
the
what I'm
fastest
getting
time
at, so.
in human
But when it
lifespan
is
that
gender
our brains are
specific,
changing.
when it is gender specific, I understand where the dichotomy lies in that as well. So absolutely, it is hard to form identity in that time frame. I think that the identity comes with the person that they are.
Indeed. But then we go back to, but we have kids who are being assigned male at birth and treated as such and assigned female at birth. There's a really interesting study going on. I don't know if folks would be familiar with this. There's a mom in Toronto. I heard her speak at a conference. I think it's Toronto. She is the mom of 3 kids, and her youngest child they are raising as a gender-neutral person in the world, which means there are 7 people in the entire world that know the sex of this child. They've seen the child with no clothing.
But it is not, this person is not a hermaphrodite.
No.
It doesn't have both.
Well, not that has
person
been
does not
released to the
have
public.
no-
Mom and Dad made a conscious decision that they were going to raise this child not identifying it with a gender so that other people could not put their expectations on the child as to what they should be interested in, what they should aspire to be when they grow up, what kind of sports they might play, what kind of games they might like.
Understood, but there's still like physiological things that transpire with this person, correct?
I would assume so, but when a woman was speaking at the conference, she was speaking about a 2-year-old.
Oh, well,
So
understood.
it was viewed as an experiment to see how much the child would be shaped by having no expectations placed on him or her, because we were not sure, or them. And Mom's take on it was, when this child is old enough, this child will tell us how they identify. It is not up to me to start calling this child he or she or them before the child even has a sense of who they are in the world. So let's let the kid figure it out. So we're waiting for the kind of the follow-up stories to happen on what happened with Baby Star. But if you want to Google Baby Star when you leave, Storm. Baby Storm. It's a fascinating read. Yes, you have a question or a comment?
Well, right before you mentioned that, I was going to ask, do you think anytime soon they get to the point where when a baby is born, regardless of what's going on between the legs, that they won't put a gender on the birth certificate? That they will, because as someone who right now is trying to take the steps to get my birth certificate changed, it's a pain in the ass. And it wouldn't be such a pain in the ass if I got to, at some point, select that for myself as a child. Because genitalia has nothing to do with anything exterior. So, do you think they'll ever get to the point where I'll be like, hey, there's a lot of people filling out paperwork, just change this little letter. Why don't we just wait at the birth and put baby, tiny or big they were, that's how long they were, they smile, and leave the gender, fill in that space for it.
Do I think it's possible? Yes. Do I have a time frame in my mind when we'll be able to get to that with all of the institutional stuff that's going on next week? Maybe not next week. Maybe not, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, the short answer is yes, I do think it's possible.
I think
Yeah, it would be. It would change the world for a lot of people. But there's a lot of institutional stuff around that that will have to change first. Okay, so the other thing that we have recently found out, especially important since I hear from so many schools, these kids are too young to know. Why are you putting these ideas in kids' heads that they might be X, Y, or Z? What we're finding out from the research is that the kids have actually started questioning within their own head between the ages of 5 and 7. That's first grade. So kids who are now coming out, the average age of 13 years old, which is down from 19 less than a decade ago. These kids have been percolating on this question for quite some time. It's not something that they just woke up one morning and decided, hey, I'd like to try this out, or hey, this is what I think today. This is something that they have been reflecting on for quite a bit of time. The trends that we're seeing that go with those that drop in those ages that I just mentioned, we're getting calls now for kids as young as 6 years old. We came together to serve high school kids. I don't have a play group available. We need a play group. We absolutely need a play group. We need something for that age range of like 8 to about 11 for the kids who they're not really age appropriate to be hanging out in a drop-in center that operates until 9 o'clock every evening. What mom wants to be carting their 10-year-old out to something that doesn't end until 10 o'clock. So as an agency, we're looking at this trend that's happening across the country that we're going to be needing to put together some services for kids who are getting younger and younger. And we're talking about now play groups and not let's sit down and talk about what just happened with the election. One of the other really interesting things that has happened in probably the past 2.5 years for us, 2.5 to 3 years, is that we've seen a shift in the parental support that our kids are getting in a lot of cases. It used to be that if I heard from a parent, I heard that my kid is not allowed to come to your group, my kid is not allowed to be gay. To which I can only say, tell me how that goes for you in about 10 years. Now if we hear from parents, I get questions more like, I know my kid has been gay or lesbian or trans since they were 4 or 5. I love my kid, I want my kid to be happy. How do I find you? And what resources do we need? Where are the docs? Where are the counselors? How do I buy a binder? these are all things that parents need to think through when they have an LGBT kid that they're not necessarily thinking about with a heterosexual kid. And we've seen this great push toward parents who are more supported in the last couple of years. I think that's because, maybe, I don't have hard stats on this either, but I think that's because a lot of the younger parents went through school at a time when there were already LGBT services in their high schools. They went through schools when the GSAs were being started and being launched. So now this has always been part of the landscape for them. This is always part of the conversation. You grow up, you have a kid out of college, you get married, you do whatever you're gonna do, and there's the baby, and 10 years later the baby decides to tell you that I'm gay, I'm trans, I'm bi, whatever I am. And this is just kind of part of the conversation. And that's really kind of cool, because our kids are experiencing more support at home than they were in previous years. But that said, one of the other trends I gotta tell you about is the kids who are not experiencing that kind of support. There's been a pushback in the last year or so against LGBT issues. And we're getting calls now that I haven't gotten since the late 90s with parents who want to take their child to reparative therapy, want the name of a counselor who will help fix their child. I can't tell you who those folks would be. I can tell you who the counselors would be who will help support your child. About a year and a half ago, I got a call from a parent who wanted to take their child in for an exorcism when their child came out as transgender. The amount of damage that can be done to a kid's developing psyche when they're subject to that kind of treatment will go for decades. So there has been this great forward movement in the last decade, and now there's this huge pushback that we're seeing in some cases. Okay, so the limited education and support, the last point on this slide, limited education and support is hopefully now shifting because schools are trying to get in front of this topic. So we're getting more calls to come in and do education. You know, spend an hour talking to us about LGBT adolescent development. Spend an hour talking to us about current trends. We could spend an hour just on this slide with all of the information that's going on across the country right now. So hopefully what that will do is start to address some of those institutional things and make the schools more welcoming. I am hopeful that we will continue to do, or not do, but we will continue to see more welcoming attitudes even at the administrative level, trying to get in front of the principals groups and superintendents groups to get this information to them so that they can protect and support the students who are going through their schools. All right, so a little bit about the youth outlook groups. What happens at these alleged youth outlook groups? We might have a very serious discussion on one night. The next night, we might have a scavenger hunt. We might be talking about healthy relationships one night. The following week, we might be playing Queer Pictionary or Queer Chairs. We try to mix it up. We try to do one serious thing and then one not so serious thing, so there's a cycle. We also are trying to take into account that there's often an age range of interests and developmental levels for the kids who are coming in. From what I understand from Heather, we've met kids who are 12 to 18 in this drop-in center. So you can imagine the developmental difference there is pretty big. What the 12-year-olds are interested in and want to do really doesn't measure up to what the 18-year-olds are interested in and want to talk about. So there are lots of things that happen. We're trying to hit a large audience with the kinds of topics that we're putting together for the drop-in centers. Most of our spaces meet once a week. This one meets once a week. We do have a couple that meet twice a month. The newer ones are the ones with smaller attendance. Usually we'll go for twice a month. So it does get a little silly from time to time, the drop-in centers, as you could tell, and we kind of try to set a tone for what we're doing. So from the top down, hopefully, silliness, there's lots of humor involved in being part of a youth outlook group. We, behind the scenes, are doing more advertising to be able to take this information to school districts and mental health providers. And now, in the last few minutes, I would like to tell you, since it is Pride Month, I would like to tell you a little bit about some of the kids that we have seen come through the doors since I've been with the agency. Okay? This is Shane. Shane was 16 when I met him. I can remember Shane's client number off the top of my head. I don't know why I am able to spew these ridiculously trivial details. Shane was the first kid I ever met walking into a Youth Outlook drop-in center, ever, in my job, first kid, boom. Shane went on to become the, not just youth leader, but the youth leader who helped us establish the Youth Leadership Project. Shane took me out in the hall one night at group and said, I would like to get more involved. What can you do with me? We developed youth leadership. Shane went on to go on to the board of directors after Shane left youth leadership. He was the only youth serving board member. Shane became board secretary, was board secretary for about 18 months. Came back after board secretary stint was over and became a social work intern, very first youth leader intern who returned. And Shane's claim to fame in this journey with me is Shane's had every job in the agency except mine. Shane is also quoted as saying, Shane was a real wise guy, and at one point during Shane's internship, he looked at me and he went, you know, Nance, it's not that people really like you. It's more like you're a train wreck and they can't take their eyes off you. You want to pass this internship, right? Let me tell you a little bit about Audrey. Audrey challenged her school district at the board meeting for District 203 as a 16-year-old because she wanted sexual orientation included in their non-discrimination clause. I sat with Audrey at this board meeting, and Audrey stood up in front of probably 200 adults with her voice shaking, all of her body quivering, and testified to the board about how she was being bullied at school. She sat down, and one of the other people in the room stood up and proceeded to call her a pervert, a pedophile, and tell her that she and all of her disgusting friends were going to be dead by the time she was 25 of AIDS, of course, because that's what everybody dies of. I was sitting, Audrey was on the end, I was probably sitting on the fourth seat, and I looked over, I was close enough to see the tears welling up in Audrey's eyes, and she did not back down. She walked out of that building, got in front of the news cameras, and came out on the evening news, and I just stood there thinking, I hope her parents knew. Audrey now is raising 3 children and just got her graduate degree in counseling with 3 children under the age of 5. She is an amazing young woman. Anne launched the Kane County Network for professionals working with LGBT youth as an intern with me. Started out as a youth leader back in 2002. Also launched a support group that we do at West Aurora High School. It's the only support group we do at a high school level. Anne launched it, and then went on to launch a second support group at that high school for kids who couldn't come during the day. She started an afternoon after-school group. She was honored with our Excellence in Service Award in 2013. And sometimes really cool things happen. Shane and Anne got married last spring. It was really fun. Peter runs our Tuesday evening group. He was once a kid with our drop-in center. He was about 16 when that first picture was taken. On the right there, you see him getting his Excellence in Service Award and Dare to Dream, our gala in 2016. Every year, if we ask, he donates a piece of his artwork for the auction. And he gives, and he gives, and he gives. And there is nothing that I can't ask this man for that he won't give me. Kelly created our middle school group at Clinton Rosette Middle School. Clinton Rosette in DeKalb is the first middle school in the state that had a GSA. Kelly put that together. Kelly was one of our kids back in 2005. She now is raising 2 children. Then there's Tony. I met Tony when he was about 19. My very first memory of Tony was sitting in a group, big circle, and Tony was sitting next to me. Kids were going around introducing themselves, as we do in check-in every night. And we got to Tony, and the question was, where do you like to buy clothes for drag? And Tony kind of gestured at himself and went, she's a big girl, she's got to go to Lane Bryant. Tony's working on his master's degree in psychology. He was the first program manager that I hired in 2008. We got to keep him for a year, and then our funding rolled over, and the recession hit, and we were not able to fund his position again. So Tony went back to volunteering with us. Michael. Michael became the second runner-up nationally for youth advocacy in his high school when he started a program for teaching his faculty about safe space. Michael was a really cool kid. What'd you notice about that sentence? I said was. Michael didn't make it. Michael inspired the Michael Fairbanks Youth Advocacy Award that we give out every year. He was 19 years old when he died. Sometimes things happen. There was a week in 2013, yes, 2013. I got a call Tuesday evening that one of our kids from the Naperville Drop-In Center sat on the train tracks and let herself get run over. That was Tuesday evening. Wednesday morning, I woke up to a note that said, one of my former interns, my first intern in this job, took a bunch of muscle relaxers and sat in his car with the engine running. And then it was 24 hours. Sometimes things happen and it changes everything for us. So sometimes we're really silly. Sometimes the world gets shaken up. Then we move on to kids like David, or as we now call him, Dr. David Walker, resident of neurology at Rush Medical Center. Was a kid with us in 2008. Here's one of my favorite stories. This is Matt. It's Matt when Matt was 16 at the drop-in centers with his friend Audrey that I just talked about, who challenged her school board. And that's Matt last fall. And that date is very important. November 12th, 2016. Mr. Matt and Mrs. Matt were with him to support him for his work on the Pride Parade. I'll come back to that in just a minute. You know what's fun about this photo? Besides the fact that it was taken by Shane and all of those kids were youth leaders together and Shane was working for me at the time. There's Matt, there's Tony, there's Ann, there's Audrey. That's what they all look like when all of that amazing stuff was happening. They were babies, and they were challenging the world. So our kids challenge the world when they leave.
That's a great sign.
Our kids do incredible things when they leave Youth Outlook. And I'm telling you that because I think Matt did something really incredible. That date was important because it's 3 months, 5 months exactly from when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened. Matt is living in Orlando when that happened. After the shooting happened, Matt had been involved for a number of years in the Orlando Pride celebration and parade. Matt led the vigil for all of the healing that happened after the most deadly shooting in our history at that nightclub. Matt sent me his story to tell me one of the biggest reasons that he was able to do what he did is because we gave him what we gave him when he was a kid. Because Youth Outlook was there for him. Because what happened with him feeling loved and accepted changed his life. And he felt in a position to be able to give back to his community when that shooting happened, and he needed to be there for the people who survived it. I hope all is well, and if you ever need anything, please let me know. We change the world. Heather changes the world every week, right here in this church. The fact that this church agreed to bring us in, to have a youth group, changes the world. Who knew in 2002, when I was hanging out with Matt at Great America and we were going on the roller coaster, because I love roller coasters, right? Who knew in 2002 when I was doing that with Matt and Audrey and Tony, that Matt was going to grow up to be one of the people who led his community efforts to help heal after the Pulse nightclub shooting? Who knew David Walker was going to grow up to be a neurologist? And I think those are just 2 kids. That's a handful of kids that I've just talked about who are touching hundreds of other lives. We've met thousands of kids. We've changed the world for thousands of kids. This is changing the world. Now I have to tell you the most fun thing I have ever said. If you can picture this, we had our gala 4 nights after the election last fall, and I was very, very nervous that I was bringing together a group of LGBT people for their first LGBT event 4 nights after our election. I sat in meetings where people were crying, where people couldn't imagine how they were going to continue their work in their not-for-profits. A lot of fear, a lot of how do we manage with this change? And I was nervous that I would not have the right thing to say to this group of people to be encouraging. And I had to find the humor in it. And what I would want to say to every group that I ever talk to is exactly what I say here. We will not stand by while walls are built. We have been doing this for almost 20 years. We have already raised an entire generation of young people. We will dismantle that wall, repurpose it into someplace we can all go to brunch, and fly a rainbow flag off the top of it. Amen. We create community. You create community. That's what it's all about. Thank you from all of us that we have created community for the people that you all will create community for next. Comments or questions? Wow. I had a lot to say.
And times, and can get you hooked up in the fall.
Yep.
How did the youth get involved in the leadership?
Andrea, or one of the other youth leadership designees, would come into a training. We need a group of 3 to 5 kids to get started. And then there are subsequent trainings, kind of youth leader retreats that happen. And we're working on a way to get the youth leaders from each program to be able, something technologically, to be able to be in touch with people in Sterling and in DeKalb and in Naperville so that they're not, the pockets are not so isolated, because we're not build a team.
Then completely different from all of these youth outlet questions. I was in Central Illinois a week ago visiting my mother, and she received a phone call, which I took. It was very offensive. It was from some family, it had family in the title. It happened to me really fast. The gist of the phone call was that this group with family in the title wanted me to call Jason Barrickman, my mother's representative, to, how is they worded it? So that people who can't falsify their birth certificates and, change their gender on their birth certificates and falsify their birth certificates and blah, blah, blah. So my mom, being the ornery 89-year-old she is, I said, hey, Mom, you want me to call and tell them to vote, anyway, vote opposite of what they said. She goes, sure, go ahead. So I did. It was great. And then I gave the information to my sister and, told her, but it was like HB 5872 or something, but I looked it up and I thought I had it in my phone and I don't. Can anybody help me and address this and tell me more about it? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there was just some legislation that went through on being able to pass our gender marker on your birth certificate. I'm sure that was pushback that you were hearing.
Okay, did it pass?
It passed last week.
Wait, say that again.
It's gotta go on the voters, it's gotta go to the voters, right? Yeah. Passed in the House.
I can't bring up the numbers, it's
No, but
HB.
what is the gist of it?
To be able to change your gender marker on your birth certificate. A lot easier. Yeah. Do I have time to share just one more story? All right, since folks are not throwing lots of questions out, I will share one more personal kind of thing that happened. There's a big push to deal with bullying at the schools, right, at the school level. If you take anything out of this room tonight, I hope you will take away that bullying doesn't stop in middle school. Bullying doesn't stop in high school. What has happened since November is that LGBT folks have actually experienced an uptick in being on the receiving end of hate crimes, having hate crimes targeted at them. We went from number 4 to number 3 nationally. We are only we are falling right behind anti-immigration crime and anti-black crime, and we have switched place with swastika graffitiing in the last 6 months. And I share this story and tell you it's a personal thing that it doesn't stop after high school, middle school, because I had this really weird experience last week. Here I am, I'm bebopping around in the world as, not just a lesbian, but the lesbian in 6 counties, The only person I know that gets paid to be queer, here I am. Friday, do you remember Friday? Friday was a great day. I had worked every night last week and I took Friday afternoon off. It was a beautiful afternoon. I wanted to do stuff like plant flowers in my yard and make my yard a really cool place to hang out this summer. And as I'm sitting in my driveway Friday afternoon, I don't think I've been out of my house 15 minutes. And the people who live next door to me, as they do, started their every Friday, every Saturday night, beer drinking, burn my garbage kind of collection. And I overheard, I don't know if they knew I was there, I don't know if they cared that I was there, but I got treated to an earful of how much fun it is to park our pickup trucks right at the edge of that dyke next door's driveway so she can't get out between the fire hydrant and the front of my car. And I'm just waiting for her to touch my truck. Just waiting. And I let it go. They didn't say anything. I've suspected for a long time that that's what they were doing. They drive on my lawn, they park on my grass. I know they're squeezing me, and I know they're doing it for fun. We go higher, right? So I didn't say anything. A few hours later, I was in my herb bed. I like the garden. I like to play in the dirt. I was in my herb bed, standing next to the fence that divides our property. And I was talking to a friend. Standing right there having a conversation. I was as close to that fence as I am to Meredith. And one of them walked up on the other side of the fence, unzipped his fly, and proceeded to urinate on my fence, under my fence, so that it was splashing up on me. Bullying doesn't stop after middle school, it doesn't stop after high school. I am 52 years old. I have a master's degree in social work, and I have dedicated my career to helping people. And that man peed on me.
Did you happen to have the hose in your hand at the time?
No, I had pruning shears in my hand. He'd better feel lucky there was a fence in the way. So if you take nothing else out of this room tonight, what's happening is still very real. And it is still very frightening, and sometimes it's outright vile. On that note, yes?
You said the D word. Where does that fit in the lexicon?
Okay for me to call myself that? It's okay for you to call me that if you were my friend and I have given you permission. but for you just to use it, that'd be considered disrespectful.
Okay.
Have a wonderful week, everyone. Thank you for being here.